Part 1, Outside the Kingdom. Chapter 1, Existence, the Universe, and God. There comes a time when a person begins wondering what the world is really like. When that first happened to me, it was like waking up from a long slumber. During childhood, existence was comprised of playing and exploring and begging for ice cream and whatnot. But at some point, there came this awareness that there was, for better or worse, more to existence than those childish things. Many around me seemed to reach that ominous awareness, only to try and pull the covers over their heads and go back to sleep. As for me, I gradually came awake and found myself in a fog, unable to see the safe path ahead. The more I came awake, the more I knew I could no longer sit carelessly in the fog, trifling with school, work, dating, or whatever else they call practical, while questions of eternal significance remained unanswered. To remain fixated on such minutiae would have looked about as rational to me as strolling through a minefield concerned only about keeping my shoes clean. Questions I had never thought to ask were now all I could think about. Where, I wondered, have I come from? Am I the byproduct of accidental physical processes, or did some intelligent being have a hand in my creation? Then there was the even heavier question that followed. Where am I headed? Will I die and be greeted by eternal darkness? Or is there something in me that goes on living after my body perishes? There I stood, face to face with my bare existence, and I could not answer the most basic question about it. Why? The uncertainty tormented me, and I needed answers. The problem was, opinions on these questions are as diverse as humanity itself. Christians, Muslims, atheists, Buddhists, yoga enthusiasts, they all answer these questions very differently from each other, and that's before even accounting for the beliefs once common among ancient civilizations. Perhaps Zeus had something to tell me. One option was to accept without question what I was raised to believe, but then why not simply blindfold myself, throw a dart at a map, and embrace the most common worldview wherever the dart pierced? On the other hand, surely whatever answers I reached by investigation were equally unlikely to be true. There were far too many options, and wouldn't it be arrogant of me to ever think I found the one correct option? Was I doomed to live in this fog? Perhaps, I thought, but I would not easily accept it. First, I would wrestle with these questions. What else was there to do? It seemed to me that humanity was set apart from the other animals by its ability to contemplate and understand things. If I could do nothing else, I would at least take the time to be human and think. At the broadest level, I found the question to be a simple either or. Either the physical world around me stumbled into existence out of mindless processes, or something like a mind first existed and created the rest. Call this theoretical mind what you will. I will call it God. Thus, the question I began with was simply this: is there a God or not? Exploring this question, among the first things I discovered was that some of the greatest minds in the history of the world have believed in God. Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, John Locke, Isaac Newton, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Albert Einstein, Sir Francis Bacon, René Descartes, Max Planck, Francis Collins, and on and on. Given the harsh rhetoric I had often heard from atheists about the idiocy of belief in God, this list alone was enough to surprise me. Certainly some of history's famous thinkers were atheists too. Sigmund Freud, Stephen Hawking, Bertrand Russell, David Hume, Alan Turing, Ayn Rand, etc. But then it wasn't the theists I was typically hearing say I would have to be an idiot not to take their side. To me, it seemed the theists were actually the more impressive intellectual bunch. And I discovered a comical irony when I experienced firsthand how few of the aggressive atheists had done any real thinking on the matter before confidently asserting their beliefs. It turns out that cult-like behavior can thrive perfectly well among the religious and non-religious, academic and non-academic alike. Thus, right from the start, in the simple comparison of atheists to theists, the theists struck me as the sturdier intellectual bunch. This came nowhere near convincing me that there is a God, but it did convince me that belief in God is not only for the weak-minded. If I ultimately decided God was real, I would find myself in perfectly rational company. The real question, however, was why so many intellectual giants had decided to believe in God. Oxford University's Philosophy of Religion selected readings gave me a good overview of the philosophical landscape I was exploring, and in William Lane Craig's Reasonable Faith, I found a philosophically rigorous analysis of the arguments for God's existence. 3 arguments were especially noteworthy. Morality. The first is what they call the moral argument, which I found in Craig's Reasonable Faith and C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. This argument begins by observing that humanity is a species governed in part by morals. For instance, nearly everyone seems to agree that people should be treated fairly, that they should not murder each other, and that they should defend or at least refrain from hurting the innocent and helpless. But why? Why do people make such a fuss about doing the right thing? Who cares if the rich prosper on the backs of the poor? What difference does it make if murderers are allowed to go on murdering without consequence? The moral argument states, in short, that morality is an illusion unless there is some ultimate consequence for immoral conduct and reward for moral conduct, i.e., unless God exists to hold humanity accountable. Here, the second law of thermodynamics becomes relevant. By this law, we learn that the universe we inhabit is heading irreversibly toward its end. Eventually, all the stars, including our sun, will burn out, and our universe will rest in what the scientists call heat death. There will be no life and no light, only cold darkness. But if our universe is irreversibly headed for death, what's the point of human morality? There are 2 options. 1, God is real, and morality is therefore objectively, eternally true. Or 2, God is an illusion, and morality is an instinct that evolved to temporarily prolong humanity's existence before everything goes dark. Applying these options to a well-known atrocity, either the Holocaust was objectively, eternally wrong, or it merely makes humans uncomfortable since that sort of behavior is unlikely to facilitate the temporary prolonging of our species. This argument did little to convince me that God exists. It played on my emotions more than anything, because I wanted my life to mean something. The argument did, however, help me better understand why religious people have historically pressed the boundaries of human rights movements, charity, science, art, and education. Although there are plenty of good-hearted atheists out there who help numerous people or push the boundaries of science and education, their atheism itself could not be what drives them to that. If the atheist is honest with himself, he can really only be biding his time until everything goes dark. The most sensible thing he could do would be to immerse himself in the most pleasant distractions available. Thus, the moral argument clarified the stakes. My life would either mean something, or I would have to seek distraction for the duration of my meaningless existence. Design. Among the great minds mentioned earlier, it was especially the scientists who often found themselves so enthralled with the physical world, with structure and beauty to be seen in everything from its smallest particles to its cosmic sea of galaxies, that they could not believe such a majestic and functional place came into existence by mindless, accidental processes. You might drop and accidentally break a computer. You will not drop a box of parts and find that a computer has accidentally built itself. Philosopher William Paley famously argued it this way: if you come upon a watch lying on the ground, you will observe its complex parts working together and functioning toward a purpose, namely to tell time. It will be rational of you to conclude that someone designed the watch for precisely that purpose. No mindless series of accidents will cause a watch to exist. Only a mind could make one. But how much more functional and complex is this universe than a watch? I, for one, have never seen a man-made machine as elegant or complex as a galaxy, an eyeball, or an atom. If I look at a simple machine such as a watch and rationally conclude that it was designed, then I will be no less rational to look at this universe, teeming with far greater functionality and complexity, and conclude the same. In reply to this argument, the atheist will often accuse the theist of invoking a God of the gaps. It is irrational, they say, to bring in God every time there's some scientific phenomenon that humanity hasn't figured out yet. Once upon a time, before modern medicine, there were witch doctors who purported to have supernatural healing powers. Science rendered witch doctors obscure, and with every advance in science, the need for God will likewise diminish. Is a God of the gaps really so irrational, though? Consider this watch we found on the ground. Would it become irrational to conclude that someone designed it once I learned how its parts work? Of course not. how something works is only one element in the broader question of why it works. The watch works, one, because its mechanisms function together to display the time, and two, because someone crafted those mechanisms to function that way. Will the atheist insist I am settling for a watchmaker of the gaps when I never observed the watchmaker firsthand but still refuse to believe that the watch built itself? I doubt it. Indeed, the more I learn about the inner workings of the watch, the more rational it will be to attribute the watch's functionality to a designer. This leads to the next point. Not all gaps are equal. I sometimes comb the beaches near my mother's home in Sequim, Washington, and in some of my earliest memories on those beaches, I was surprised to find clusters of tree-sized logs on the shore. I could not understand how they got there, since I had no conception of rising and falling tides, nor did I realize how easily the waves could carry such enormous items. I drew no conclusions from the presence of those logs. They were simply there, and I couldn't understand why. Ignorance was sufficient until I heard a valid explanation of how they got there. I needed no designer to fill that gap. On the other hand, I often came across words in the sand at the same beach and never hesitated to conclude that someone wrote them. If I see "Jane loves Rochester" in the sand, I see a complete sentence using a language I'm familiar with. It is a matter of common sense that sentences do not write themselves. People write them. I can never prove that a person wrote the words in the sand, which does make that a gap, but it is a gap indicating a mind at work. Geneticist Francis Collins noted in his book, The Language of God, that the genetic code is something like a language itself, and a far more complex language than my native English. Every living creature is a sort of organic essay written in the genetic code, and those essays must be written with great precision, or else the entire organism is compromised. Here was yet another system of such complex functionality that humanity was just getting around to a rudimentary understanding of it by the 21st century. Here was another gap indicating a mind at work, and learning the how served only to intensify the question of why. Examples abound. To be an atheist, I would have to attribute the intricate fine-tuning of the universe to blind luck, yet the advancements of science seem only to strengthen the inference of a designer. Origin. The third and final argument I encountered stems from the fact that our universe has a beginning. I call this a fact because the bulk of scientists with relevant expertise, atheists included, agree on this point, and I am bound by my lack of scientific expertise to trust their assessment. But if our universe, which is by definition the sum total of all space and matter, once did not exist, it is something like a miracle that it began to exist. Another scientific law becomes relevant. The law of conservation of mass, which states that matter can be neither created nor destroyed. By this law, the existence of our universe is, put simply, impossible. There was once nothing, and now there is something. Matter cannot be created, but it was. This surprising event is commonly called the Big Bang. The thinking of the theist here is straightforward. It is self-evident that the universe could not have created itself. Not even humans with their high-end brains have discerned how to create matter out of nothing. So surely nothingness did not become bored and create itself into everything we now see. Had there been nothing outside our universe to bring it into existence, there would have been no universe. Thus, the intellectual crisis for atheists begun by the design argument is compounded. Not only is our universe more impressively designed than any man-made machine, the existence of anything at all is scientifically impossible. Something that doesn't play by our rules must have done it. After I considered these arguments, I thought the existence of God made more sense than the alternative, but one thing continued troubling me. Not one of the arguments was enough to prove God's existence. It remained possible that morality is an evolutionary byproduct designed to temporarily preserve our species. It remained possible that the seeming design of the universe was the result of something mindless like natural selection. It remained possible that the universe sprang into existence as part of some currently inexplicable process the quantum physicists and cosmologists haven't yet identified. In short, what troubled me was that I could not prove God's existence with airtight certainty. Many religious people at this phase of the process dismiss my skepticism outright. Just have faith, they would say, by which I took them to mean I should suspend all rationality and adopt beliefs without evidence. If such intellectual suicide was required to adopt theism, I would not do it. But if I could not prove God's existence, then I could not rationally believe it, or so the atheists were saying. According to them, the burden of proof, i.e., the obligation to prove one's claim, is on the one making the most extraordinary claim, and the claim that God exists is as extraordinary as a claim can be. Upon further thought, however, I began to wonder, is the burden of proof really on the one claiming God's existence? It seemed to me that at every turn the theist would say the most obvious thing, and the atheist would reply, "It's not what it looks like." The theist would say, "The universe could not be so well designed without God to design it." The atheist would reply, "It's not what it looks like. Technically, a series of extraordinary accidents could have done it." The theist would say, "The universe couldn't have sprung into existence without God to cause it." The atheist would reply, "It's not what it looks like. Technically, we could be just one universe as part of a multiverse the scientists just haven't observed yet." Why was the burden of proof on the theist when the atheist was the one having to conjure wild alternatives to the most obvious conclusions? It seemed to me that the atheist's merely possible alternatives were every bit as extraordinary as the theist's claims. So at that phase of my journey, I could see no valid basis for placing the burden of proof on the theists, and that's without even bringing in Occam's razor to dice up the atheist's complex alternatives to the straightforward theistic conclusions. Small wonder William of Occam landed in the theist camp. The fact is, I cared more about what was true than about which side was saddled with some burden that had zero effect on the actual substance of the arguments. The burden of proof was really only a tiebreaker for when all other things were equal. But I wasn't trying to win a debate. I was in search of the truth. After examining the arguments for God's existence, I found that my fog had cleared a little. The sturdiest intellectual bunch took the evidence to the most natural conclusion, and the existence of God seemed more likely than the alternative. Where this path would next take me, I could not be sure. Prayer. God, are you even there? I don't know if you are, and I honestly don't know if I want you to be, since I expect that you would want to limit my freedom. But I do know this: I don't want to live in this fog anymore. I want to know what is real, what is true. I'm afraid of what I might find, but not as afraid as I am of this ignorance. If you're there, God, please prove it to me. If you're there, I want to know it. These arguments make me think you might really exist, but how can I know for certain? Will you help me find you?